I'd like to invite our panellists to come up for this next discussion. James, Angus, Sarah and Christian, and I'll introduce them all. Please come up and join me. Squeeze in there. And David, sorry. So I will now. So you've met James and Angus. Angus being one half of Future Crunch with Tane already. But let me introduce your other panellists. So we've got Dr. Sarah Paterson, who is CEO of ANU Enterprise. She's a visiting fellow at ANU's College of Business and Economics, and she's also on the Minister's Advisory Committee for the Innovation Exchange, along with Sam Austin, ACVID's president. She's had a very eclectic career, as you'll see if you read your papers, the bios, spanning innovation, academia, management consulting and government. And she also worked in business with Cadbury's, where she was an innovation champion, and has been part of their leadership team. So big warm welcome for Sarah. Next to Sarah we have David Paterson, and David is the Managing Consultant of Cornerstone Strategy, which is, as you'll hear, an organisation that's very interested in helping organisations innovate. Previously he was the former Chief Innovation Officer at World Vision Australia New Zealand, and he is acknowledged as an international leader in strategic innovation. Much of his work at World Vision centred upon the business models that they use and adapting them and designing new ways to innovate to sustainably scale up World Vision's work internationally in areas such as urban slum development, social enterprise and market innovation. So a big welcome to David. And at the end of the panel, opposite end from me, is Christian Nielsen, who is Executive Director of Live and Learn. He's also an ACVID Executive Committee member, and he has over 25 years' experience as a development practitioner, particularly focused in the Pacific, where he lived for a decade. He established many of Live and Learn's country programs, and particularly he's got an affinity and great love for the Solomon Islands, where he worked and lived for a long time. He's a company director of Social Entrepreneurs International, which is a global network bringing together social entrepreneurs. So big warm welcome to Christian. So now I know you've got questions for Angus and James, but we're going to actually just start with our other panellists first, just to get them talking a little bit about what they think innovation is and what it means for NGOs. So Sarah, we'll start with you. So you've had a career working in innovation, essentially. So what are the attributes of innovation for you?
Yes, so if you look at my career history, a lot of it's been around the technological innovation, so PhD in particle physics, stuff in cancer diagnosis using lasers and synchrotrons, etc., etc. And in fact, now I'm actually no longer CEO of ANU Enterprise. I'm CEO of the Canberra Innovation Network, which is trying to grow a whole innovation ecosystem in Canberra. So that's looking at growing the startup scene, helping SMEs grow faster and drawing large multinationals to come and be part of some fantastic hotbed of innovation and grow our economy. So that's where I am now. In terms of my view of innovation, it's actually quite broad. It's basically trying to either do things differently or design new things to create value. So I really loved what James was talking about, saying that it's all about impact. I'd absolutely agree. The aim of the game is impact, and if you want to change those words slightly, it's actually about delivering value. And that value can be social value, economic value, environmental value, visual value, whatever value you want. So it's quite broad. But it's also very, very much so, as James was saying, about collaborative. If you want to do innovation rapidly and deliver the best value, I believe it has to be collaboratively. So one of my backgrounds was head of open innovation at Cadbury, and in fact I'm on Newscom today as an expert in ballistic confectionery, which was marrying some technology designed for lightweight materials for tanks that I transferred then to confectionery to make sweets that blow up in your mouth. And in the open innovation arena, you also find that what you want to do is you want to deliver value for your consumers, value for your customers, value for the people that you're working with, and you'll do that with anybody, absolutely anybody, including your arch enemies. If you look at Procter & Gamble and Clorox, so Procter & Gamble are direct competitors on a global basis, but they both had a piece of technology which, when they brought it together, opened up a whole new market for them, the Glad wrap bags. If they had not collaborated, they would have missed out a whole market opportunity. So for me, innovation absolutely is about delivering value, and how you deliver that is whatever way you possibly can, collaborating with whoever you can that's going to give you the biggest value as fast as you can.
That's very interesting, because we're a sector that likes to think we are good at collaboration. David, I'm wondering, you've worked inside Australia's largest international development agency, so how did you go about planning for innovation? How did you create a culture for innovation? Have you succeeded?
So now that I'm out, I can say anything I want. To be honest with you, I think when I was at World Vision, we sort of divided the agenda into two streams. One was really about strategic innovation, in the sense of right out there, game-changing, rethinking things, and the other was sort of core innovation, which is more how do we build innovation into our everyday work, and it's the former that I was really part of. So in a sense, my philosophy is, I know this is probably not what some people want to hear, but I think it's very, very difficult to change the culture of an organisation anytime soon. I think that really at the end of the day, it's people who innovate more so than organisations. And so a lot of the work there was really around assembling teams of people who were already in the right headspace, could bring the right combinations of skills to the table, and doing the vast majority of projects outside the walls of World Vision. So still for World Vision and with World Vision staff, but picking up on the same theme, just being focused on what's the outcome that we must achieve here, and then assuming that absolutely everything else is on the table. You can connect anybody in, collaborate with anybody. So I ended up doing one project with the US Army's head of counterinsurgency strategy, and another project with two young social entrepreneurs from Adelaide, and another one with a big company, and so on and so forth. And so much of innovation in that sense was, if you want to think outside the box or outside the cultural paradigm of a certain organisation, the best way to think outside the box is actually physically get outside it and leave it behind, close the door behind you, and then go and spend some time out with others in completely different spaces, and then when you're ready, bring those insights back inside the organisation, find others who will work with you to actually turn that into a reality.
Really interesting. Christian, you've worked very closely in the field. I mean, is James's observations ringing true for you, or does it look different on the ground when you're working with community organisations and communities?
Well, as far as impact is at the centre, it really rings through. I think that collaboration, of course, is very important, and the ways that we're working together, there's a lot of room for innovation on that. But also I think that innovation per se is not always good. And I remember in 2001 when Live and Learn was drawn into a partnership with WHO in Fiji and Coca-Cola on a health project. The purpose of this project was to develop a water testing kit for schools in Fiji, whereby children could test water, whether it's actually been polluted with coliform. And there was the bottles that Coke was bringing into Fiji at the time, they came in sort of test tubes, and they had the Coca-Cola cap on top. And then when they came into Fiji, they put heat to them and it forms into a Coke bottle. And Coca-Cola's contribution to this project was to deliver about 10,000 of these bottles. And when we tested it at the opening, WHO was very proud, and Live and Learn was sort of invited in to do the education on it. When you actually mix the water with the hydrogen sulfide stripped, it looked like Coke. And that was very problematic for Coca-Cola, of course. And it actually was very problematic for the health of the children because they thought it was Coke. And therefore, they would, might be tempted to drink it. So I think that innovation has to have relevance. It has to be fit for purpose. It's not always good. And surprisingly, what really surprised us was that this particular project was nominated at the 2003 World Water Forum in Kyoto for an innovation prize. And really, we're sort of thinking that's very interesting, because it was actually not a very successful development project, but it ticked all the right boxes. It had private sector engagement, it was innovative, it had never been tried before, it was great collaboration between 3 organisations, but the impact was not particularly desirable. So we need to look critically at innovation at the sort of grassroots level, and we need to actually engage the people that we're working with. I never get to a village in Papua New Guinea or Solomon Islands and a leader comes up to me and say, "Christian, I really wish your project was more innovative." It doesn't happen. And I think that we need to understand who drives innovation. We need to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to actually build on what we know and what we know works. And actually really bring the communities that we're supposed to be benefiting along with us, and makes evidence-based innovations that are truly useful. Just another couple of things I would like to say, because I mean we've heard lots of terms over the last 20 years. Last year was disruptive change, and someone pointed out that all change is disruptive, and the only constant is change. So it was another sort of catchword. Sustainability came up, as we know, a decade ago. But I think if we truly are going to make innovation work, we have to have higher risk in our aid program. If you're risk adverse, you're not going to be able to innovate. If you have the 1 year to 18 month project cycle, you're not going to be able to innovate, because innovation is also learning from your mistakes. So we persisted with the hydrogen sulfide kits, and they are still used in schools, but we innovated based on what we knew wasn't working. Yeah? So I think that risk appetite needs to change, and flexible designs. So our partners needs to be flexible. So that means that the predictability of a project or an aid program has to be relaxed a little bit in order for innovation truly to flourish. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. So, James, just listening to Christian's observations there, and David and Sarah's, how do you react? Do you see, does this ring true for you, both from your experience in Oxfam, Great Britain? Secondly, you've been working with some of our members over at a distance initially in some research we commissioned, but then also in workshops this week. So what are the attributes of innovation that came up there? The note of caution, treat innovation with caution that Christian is raising, did that come up there?
Yeah, I think there is definitely that sense of caution around the word innovation, and wanting to make sure that it's not seen as the be-all and end-all, or it's the new fad. But I think there's also, I felt a real desire among colleagues who I've been working with in Oxfam and other ACFID members who we were with in Melbourne to do things differently, and a sense that we can do more. And I found that it's almost, I haven't said that much about community-driven, community-owned, and the value and engagement of community members, because it is something a little bit self-evident in that. I think it comes out naturally in the conversations that I'm having with colleagues, that there's a real sense that, of course, we would be doing this with and alongside communities rather than just for communities. The point about the people you might go to a village in PNG and no one's going to say, we would like you to be more innovative. But I often find that I've driven past 5 villages to get to that village, and we're not working in that village, and there must be other ways to reach more people in better ways. Or I say, yeah, well, we're working with these farmers here, but not those farmers there. There must be ways. And so I think a lot about what's the route to scale. And this perhaps comes back to Sarah's point about work with your enemies, work with your friends, work with whoever you need to reach scale and to get a greater impact. So those were the things I would particularly want to pick up on.
Thanks. And Angus, I'm just interested, I'm reassured that I haven't been washed away in a wave of innovation. I'm part of the sediment. But in our sector, and listening to some of the speeches or talks, discussion now this morning, I mean, from your perspective, what is the potential for technology in development and human development in our sector? How might we apply that? And do you have any observations about how we might go about thinking about embracing it or taking it on board more?
All right. So, I'd love to answer that question, but I actually sort of think it's something a bit more important which I should do. I made this promise to myself 6 months ago when I appeared on a panel. And so the promise to myself was that if I was ever on a panel where the gender split wasn't 50-50, I would offer my seat up to a woman who knows more about innovation than I do, because there's plenty. So I was wondering, I'd love to tell you some stories about what I know. So there's so many amazing women in this room who can share stories of innovation. Please would someone come up in the spirit of Sheryl Sandberg and lean in and come take a seat and share their stories rather than me. I'd really appreciate that.
Come on, don't be shy.
Pick someone at random.
Say, Angus, on behalf of the women in the room, your gesture is enough, and it will be actually wonderful to hear from you.
I'd love to tell the stories, but let's get a woman up here. Come on, that's great. But seriously, come on. Yeah.
Come on, Molly.
Oh, there we go.
Come on, Molly.
Awesome. Thanks very much.
Just to let you know, we were hoping to have Rabina here on the panel with us too, but unfortunately she's still stuck in Islamabad.
Now that I've got the microphone, I'm just going to say that I really enjoyed the comments about more funding for science. So I'm a trained scientist, I'm a physicist, and I definitely think we need more, particularly women, in the science, technology, engineering and mathematics.
And this is Sabina Curatello, who is, what's your official title?
I'm the Head of Government Relations for Oxfam Australia.
And people might remember Sabina also from working with Bob McMullen some years ago as his Chief of Staff, so when he was PALSEC for International Development, so thanks. So, in terms of creating...
Ask me anything.
I want to go back to creating a culture. So, David, your point about creating a culture of innovation. If you're sceptical about organisations embracing innovation and becoming innovative, but you think individuals within organisations can be innovative and therefore potentially change your organisation around them over time. So I'm interested in your views and other views of the panellists about what steps or what attributes do you need to do to allow those individuals to actually thrive and be innovative?
Well, earlier in the week, James and I did a masterclass in Melbourne around innovation, and one of the things we talked quite a lot about, and other people were talking about, is the importance of culture and how culture eats strategy for breakfast, if you've heard that term before. And so I think to answer that question, the most important thing is not so much more process, more methodology, more steering committees, etc., etc. It's actually being very conscious about the culture you have in your organisation, how decisions are really made in practice, not the official version, but the unofficial version. And if you can be very self-conscious about it, or self-aware about that, you can find opportunities to loosen up a little bit and allow those people to either emerge or do something outside and what have you. So I think a lot of the answer lies in the culture question. I think a good way of doing that again is to mix it up with people from other cultures or other backgrounds. So it could be other ethnicities, I suppose, but other sectors, other genders, etc., and really mix that up and make sure that any group that you're working in, it reflects that. Once you've got that new thinking, it's surprising how often when you take that back to the organisation, it resonates really strongly with the organisation. And so you then you can think of it almost as a bell curve, and you're sort of trying to start at this end and you're trying to work that bell curve. And people along that curve, they're actually coming from different places. Some people need to be more conservative. hopefully the accountants are more conservative, or the legal people, other people are naturally more innovative. But at the end of the day, you have to bring the whole culture along. But rather than change it all at once, I'd start on the outside and then gradually work into the organisation and work that bell curve.
That's really interesting. And Sarah, I mean, you're looking at a community.
Dying to say something.
Go for it.
Well, so from the perspective of a large multinational, I had to drive change, the culture change within a large multinational. When I started out, I thought, oh God, what do I know about change? God, I don't know. So I looked through the literature, and there wasn't a lot that was really going to help me until I came across a fantastic article that said, if you want to drive change, start with success. Start with delivering value. Don't go in there and say, oh, this is going to be so superb, it's going to do this, that and the other. Actually start by delivering value. Innovation is about delivering value, so if you're going to drive innovative change, deliver value straight up. So I'd absolutely agree, David. What we did was actually we had a bit of a pilot project, so do a little bit of seed project outside, under the radar. No one really quite knows what you're doing. And that will then hopefully be successful and deliver your value, and then you can go to people and say, this is what the programme is going to do. This is the value that is going to be delivered. I'd also say that from my perspective, and this is a word I think you used, James, be a servant. Innovation is a servant. If you are a group that is driving innovation, be a servant. So I used to get alongside the people who are delivering the real value to the customers, to the consumers, and I'd say, how can I help you? You've got something that you're trying to deliver. How can I use innovation to help you deliver what you're going to do? You need to get in the shoes of the people that are trying to deliver stuff and help them to do it better, faster, cheaper, with better outcomes. Celebrate success. And it really doesn't hurt to put KPIs around innovation. We found within Cadbury, every 6 to 12 months, you'd have your key performance indicators, and we just driven from the top. So right up from the CEO, the KPI was around innovation, and that flowed down to everybody else. It doesn't hurt to give people a bit of a nudge on that front.
What about you and the audience? I mean, does anyone want to talk about their own organisation and what helps or hinders innovation? Yeah. Please say who you are and where you're from. We've got roving mics around.
I'm wondering if I could share a story from Tanzania, from one of our projects that's pretty innovative.
And just introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, it's Eddie Ozol's Operations Manager at Anglican Aid here in Sydney. I had the privilege last year of visiting Africa, and we've been supporting a disability project in northwestern Tanzania for a number of years that covers a large rural community. And that project also receives support from a Dutch foundation that supports 20 disability organisations across Tanzania. And for those of you that are familiar with the NDIS in Australia, what I saw totally blew my mind, because here in Australia we are changing the funding model for disability services from what's called block-funded models, where the government funds or gives money to NGOs who then provide services according to specifications in contracts that require the organisation to deliver services to X number of individuals. So in some cases you're trying to fit square pegs into round holes because you can't actually design a service for the individual. So the NDIS is about changing the whole, turning, as this former CEO of the Disability Department and the Minister said, flipping the sector over on its head. And so when fully operational, the NDIS will actually fund individuals. So disability services in Australia will go from a block-funded model where organisations are funded to an individual model where if you've got a disability, you meet the requirements, you're assessed, you'll be given funds, you will go and buy your services in the marketplace. So this organisation, having read the reports, I knew there was something else going on there, but I never quite understood it until I went and visited them. Because they'd written in one report they'd been selected by this Dutch organisation to manage the disability projects across Tanzania. So what I saw was what Australia is aspiring to with the NDIS. The Dutch organisation is wanting to give control to the Tanzanians in the delivery of disability services. So what they are doing is they are funding individual people with disability based on what's called an individual plan in the disability sector. So the organisation, 20 organisations have individuals who need services. So they then write a plan that meets the needs of that individual. So those plans could include things to do with renovation of houses, the purchase of livestock for income for the family. In one case I saw a young 17, 18-year-old boy who had spina bifida who had his own herd of goats. So what happens is these 20 organisations, they write out the plan, they send it to this organisation in Karagwe that we support, and which is split, so they have a direct service delivery, but they also have the provider relationship with Holland. They assess it, they look at it and they say, is it reasonable, or they go back and refine it. They then send it to Holland as an approved program, and the Dutch then send the money directly to the disability organisation that supports the individual wherever they are in the country. So that's an innovation which totally blew my mind, and I thought, well, this is where we are as a developed economy trying to get to from a social sense, and the Tanzanians and the Dutch are doing it.
Thank you very much for sharing that fascinating story. Sabina, you worked on the ACFID paper along with James on innovation and looked at some of the case studies that Inventium, your partner, collected. So for you, what was interesting, what struck you from some of the work that those cases were highlighting that was innovative?
I think what struck me is the breadth of work that's going on, and I've been following James around all week. One of the things he does keep saying is that he asks people what is interesting, what is something that you are getting excited about in your work. And when we ask that question, that actually unveils a lot of the different work that's coming out. And I've heard a lot today about not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, which is something that development practitioners are very fond of saying. And I think it's about putting the baby into a different bath. You know, it's looking at taking a look across the landscape and seeing what has been done in a different place. Like, I think this example is a really good one that we've just heard about in Tanzania. Like first looking at where solutions have already been developed and then trying to fit it into a new way. And I think that's probably one of the greatest takeouts that I've had from that piece of work.
Thanks, Sabina. Questions from the audience, from the floor? Yes, Chris. There's mics, roving mics.
Thank you. Gary Klein, in a recent book on where do insights come from, suggested there were 3 pathways for that. Sorry, I'm Chris Roach from La Trobe Uni. He talked about collaboration and connection. He talked about conflict and contradiction, and he talked about desperation. You've talked about the first quite a lot. What I would like to know more about is the power and politics and the resistance that is inevitable in your organisations or in the sector, and how that politics plays out and how that change happens. And a question about desperation, are the cuts in the age budget arguably a good thing? Because they will create more invention, more creativity, more collaboration.
Who'd like to take those on?
I can start on the last one first. I don't think they're a good thing, Chris, but I definitely understand what you're saying. Like, definitely the mother of invention and all of that. But I do want to urge the sector always to ensure that we do stay vocal about the government's responsibilities to contribute to international development in whatever form. And we always talk about the quality, and we talk about where the aid should be spent. But the quality is, for me, evidence of where the government's commitment is. So I just wanted to say that before throwing to one of the other panel members.
Would anyone like to take up the first part of Chris's question? Thanks, Sabina.
Actually, if I could continue on that just a little bit. My hearing's not so good, but I thought I heard the Minister say it was going to go to 10 billion soon, didn't he? Is that something like that anyway. But, and again, just picking up on what was just said about necessity, I think there's two parts to it. One is, yeah, look, I'd love to see it at 10 billion or 20 billion, like we all would, but it is what it is in the current situation, and so it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity there because we all, including government, including others, are forced to be more clever, which is great because we need to be more clever. And the third thing is that the minister very clearly has sort of put out the call and says and said, we want more innovation, we want bigger thinking, we want bolder ideas. And my understanding would be that by and large, the government's not seen the boldness from us in this sector that they would really like to. And so one part of it is, yes, we definitely should as a sector advocate for the right amount of resources to go in. But the other thing we can do to really influence this is actually respond to the call that's been issued. And one of the most powerful forms of advocacy would in fact to be more strategic, more bold, and actually work together to come up with much bigger plays that the government and other stakeholders can get their heads around.
Thanks, David. Denise.
Denise from Diaspora Action Australia. I've been really enjoying these discussions about innovation, and something that I was reflecting on at in Melbourne at the innovation session yesterday or the day before was the idea about the importance of organisational culture and the way innovation often happens through the bringing of different perspectives in. And so picking up on your point, David, about ethnicity, what sort of a difference would it make to our sector if we had the kind of ethnic and cultural diversity that we see reflected in Australian society, particularly from the people from the countries that in which we're working? I was just wondering if you could make a reflection about ethnicity. And on the idea of the KPIs, I mean, I'm not laying any great claims to innovation, but we do something as simple as aim to have about 60% of our staff and volunteer workforce made up of people coming from non-English speaking backgrounds, refugees, migrants. I mean, how hard would it be for our sector to do that? And what effect would it have on our capacity to innovate?
David, James, anybody?
Well, it's just a top of mind response. My last major project when I was still with World Vision was in Brazil, and man, I love their culture. They work hard and they party hard and they just have a completely different and much more liberated view of the world. And so that's just one culture. I'd love to see an organisation here in Australia that reflected, as you say, all of those strengths that all of those different cultures have to bring to the table. If you had a Brazilian CEO, for example, it would really change the social life in the organisation. but of course the same for so many other cultures, and so there is genuine richness in all of that.
Could I just add a bit too? So from my perspective, it would be fantastic to have that sort of a target, but why leave it at ethnic? Why not have... My view is that actually to innovate well, you need to live in a sea of ideas. And you need to be able to be an organisation that can be amorphous and you can change your shape. You draw these people in for that and then leave them behind for the next, these people for something else. So I would really encourage you to not even see yourselves, definitely don't see yourselves as a sector, don't see yourselves as an organisation, see yourselves as a group of people who are trying to deliver value around, impact around a specific or some specific areas. How do you amorphously do that and draw in loads of people with different ideas? Will it have the impact to increase your capacity for innovation? Absolutely. For instance, if you look within the confectionery sector, I was working with people who are foodies. They've been trained in food science. I burn food. I'm not a foodie. I'm not a food scientist. I had no idea what I was talking about. And yet, with fresh eyes, I could go out and come with completely different ideas that were going to leapfrog our competitors. So by going out to a broad range of people with different ideas, I think you will absolutely be able to find new solutions that you would never even have dreamed of, and so innovate faster and better.
But Sarah, can I just ask you on that? Does that mean that you need companies or non-government organisations with hundreds or scores of employees, or do you need different business models where you can bring in people in and out to source ideas? Or?
Different business models, and James was talking about that. You do some where you're working with the post office, and then you're looking at other models where you may, I don't know if you set up a startup that's then got the remit to invest in other companies. So yes, different business models, different business structures, and different delivery models for different impact.
Christian?
Just a comment on that. I also think it's very important to keep the people that we are innovating for in mind. Yeah, so I think that's pretty central. I think that when we were watching the Future Crunch presentation, I think it was incredibly scary to think about all the people that would be unemployed by the technology that's coming up in the future, where everyone is very excited about the innovation and the new technology. What about the social impact from innovation? And how do we actually take innovation out of focus group discussions and organisations and grounding it in the areas where it's going to be used and with the people it's going to be used by?
Marie.
Hi, I'm Marie Nutt from Results Australia. So we're an advocacy organisation, so the innovation around program delivery is perhaps something that I've got nothing to add in terms of that conversation, but I am interested in innovation around resourcing the issues that we want to deal with. And in the 21st century, I see the most innovative mechanisms have been those things like the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB and Malaria, the Gavi Vaccine Alliance and the Global Partnership for Education. So they're innovative mechanisms for financing the issues that we're dealing with in this huge funding gap that we have in terms of reaching the goals of the global goals, the SDG. So I really want to ask you, where do you see innovation around financing the issues that we're trying to address?
Sabina, James? Sabina.
I feel like we should let James talk because he's the keynote speaker, but I'm going to just say one thing first, because it was something I was thinking about, Christian, when you were talking. I had a similar thought. And then I started about, where are the jobs going to go? But then I thought, but that's thinking with the current mindset. And as we move into these technologies and this exponential thinking that we can't understand, maybe the inequality will change as well, because technology will be at the fingertips of, a broader range of people. So also, I think we have to not apply the current paradigm to what it will look like in the future. And so the same with the funding. Where's Marie? Marie runs one of the most effective advocacy I've ever seen, I have to tell you. So it's a great question, and I think the funding, again, will probably change, and it will be, I'm thinking about the crowdfunding, but on a macro scale. But this is where I'm out of my depth, so I am going to throw to you, James.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it makes me start to think about the ecosystem. And Sarah's talked about how do you create an innovation ecosystem, and it's about more than NGOs, it's about more than universities, it's about more than government. It includes funders, and it includes those with money, it includes the public. And so I think there's something useful to start imagining what would it look like, let's say, in 10 years' time in Australia and in the countries in which we're working, if it matured more. And that might mean that other forms come into being that we can't imagine now. And new people get brought in that we haven't thought would be interested or engaged or find that they can add value. I think in terms of specifics, I think about the Freedom Fund, which has been set out by a number of foundations. And I just saw it, and you can Google it, and I loved it. Because they've said they want to raise $100 million, and they're saying, we want to focus on, this is around slavery. They've said, where in the world is it worst? And in which sectors is it worst? So it may be around brick factories in northern India. That's where the problem is worst. So really gathering around a problem and prioritising, where is it worst? So I wonder, in the next 10 years, where it would be worst to be born a girl? And are we focusing effectively? And are we galvanising around particular challenges? And I think once it comes back to that problem-focused resourcefulness. But I think new forms will come into being if we look at it from the problem first, and then say, who can we crowd in, and how can we reshape this to be far more effective? And it does need to have that ecosystem approach in there. And there are other things which we're going to try and see if they work. We're playing with development impact bonds while trying not to play with people's lives, to see, does that increase creativity, or does it actually lock us into stuff that we go, crikey, we're stuck? Payment by results. It might be really useful. It might, in certain circumstances, free up an ability to say, well, we can do with whatever activities we want, as long as we achieve these outcomes. That could be really helpful. We're seeing whether that works or not, whether it does allow us to be more effective and work more effectively with others. So, and just going back to the word evidence, I think we really need strong evidence of what's working and what's not working in terms of financing. And I noticed that some forms of current financing, even some forms of current financing that we're quite keen on, can foster complacency rather than creativity, and compliance rather than collaboration.
Could I just quickly add something that goes back to what the Minister was saying, actually, that when they're very keen to grow the economies in developing countries. And I actually, I quite like that approach. I like the idea of going in and building capability. Rashid talked about this as well. Building that capability so that people in country can actually grow their own companies. So the sort of ecosystem that I'm growing in Canberra, we're looking at, well, I wonder if we should grow that in Myanmar, blah, 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 wherever, so that then those people can learn how to set up their own companies. The great thing about the technology, okay, there's lots of scary things about technology, but the great thing about technology is the democratization of knowledge, of access to skills, access to markets, ability to grow your own business. And I think that will lead to a lot of, not a lot of money, but will lead to money being available in the system. And I think the great thing about that is then the money is in the hand of the people who need it and who know what the challenges are. And because there's democratisation of a whole load of things due to the internet, etc., they'll be able to, with a bit of help with the capability building, solve their own problems.
Thank you. Now, we're going to take 3 final questions, but we're going to take them one by all together, and then we'll get our panel to respond. So Priya first, then Julia, then David.
Thank you, Mark. Pri Fernando from International Leads. First is, I think the morning has been fantastic and very thought-provoking and inspiring. I've heard delivering value, the importance of impact, the people we work with, but the underlying challenge is, for whom are we delivering value? For whom is the impact? If 2/3 of the women, 2/3 of the world's poorest are women and children, innovation cannot be gender neutral. All what I've heard is fantastic, but for whom is it delivering value? Unless we take into account innovative ways of empowering women, we will end up, even 15 years later, women still being discriminated against and being in the bottom of the ladder. So while I support everything that has been said, I'd like to emphasize impact, delivering value, and innovation cannot be gender neutral. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pri. David.
Hi, David Lewis from Cbm Australia. We particularly work for inclusion of people with disabilities into aid and development. I just wanted to say that we know that by 2030, about 60% of the world's population will live in urban environments, and we have a global goal, number 11, which is sustainable cities. And we also know that in most urban environments, there's huge, particularly youth unemployment, and particularly for young women. Also, if we go to low-income settlements around the world, you meet people who have moved in from rural areas who are really upset that their kids are now disconnected from agriculture, from growing food, from even understanding seasons. I guess I'd like to know if there's any innovative ideas for sustainable cities which we could grasp onto. Thank you.
So, an important point of principle about gender inclusivity, an important question about inclusivity of people with disabilities, and we've got a late scratching on the third question, so I'm going to use the chair's prerogative to ask a final question also, just about the Sustainable Development Goals, and will they help or hinder innovation? So gender, disability, inclusivity and the SDGs. Who'd like to start?
Oh, look, okay, I'll start with the gender. And I think that's a classic example of I'm a woman here on a board and I'm the first one up here. And the reason is because as a woman, you just got to keep leaning in. And I don't know that I like that word. I think the way I describe it is you just take that step regardless. You know, as women, you just need to go, well, okay, it's scary and maybe it could be humiliating and all those fears that women have, but you've just got to ignore all that and just step on in. So in terms of your question about how do we help innovation focus perhaps a little differently on women, I would describe it as there's a whole lot of things that men and women need, and let's make sure women have access to that for a start. Let's make sure that women feel welcome in that, because to be honest, I don't like the segregation of men and women. I'm someone who I'm actually quite gender. I don't see gender really. I like to be in there with people. But I know that other women see it differently. So something I think that we can do for women is just help them see it's possible. Celebrate the successes of some of the women that are stepping out and doing wonderful things, like we heard today. I mean, the story in Pakistan, what a fantastic story. We need to tell those stories, but we do need to tell the stories in a way that shows it's possible. I think we do have a bit of a habit of sort of worshipping some of these people who are doing fantastic things, and then it actually makes it impossible for other women to do it, because they go, well, you've got to be a goddess to do that. So I think we need to have stories that show it's possible for normal human beings to reach those heights. I think women seem to like to be with other women and network with women and share their stories and support one another. So I believe that there are mechanisms, and particularly in Indonesia, I think, where women are being drawn together, women who are in leadership to support one another. So supporting women in that way. Other ways are to just, show that maybe some training about, well, this is how you can be a woman in leadership. This is how you have the courage to step forward. Yes, everyone's scared of it, but we just step forward and do it anyway.
I was just going to thank, is it Pri for the statement? Because I do think it is important to put women at the centre of our development, and often women are great innovators as well. And I did want to just touch on the disability, just to say that, to give a plug for the Australian government's disability policy, which was an innovation. Australia set the benchmark for the rest of the world for Australia's inclusive development policy. So I think we've done it before and we can continue to do it in other areas.
And does anybody want to say anything about the Sustainable Development Goals? Are they innovative inherently, and will they help or hinder innovation? Or is it too early to say?
I feel it is too early to say. Certainly personally, I haven't found that I've looked at them and said, this is going to really help us to frame things in a way that pushes things forward. And I think we need to work out how we develop a narrative which allows us to focus and work in concerted ways to address those things which are most important for us in the coming years.
Thank you. Christian?
I think that they certainly could be used as a driver for innovation. I think that also I hope that they would equal the strong aspirations that economic growth will take people out of poverty, which I think is unfortunately an illusion. I think that the Sustainable Development Goals are bringing a more balanced perspective to this. I think certainly in the Pacific we've seen, and I guess I'm offering you a different perspective here, Sarah. We've seen economic growth in Solomon Islands during the 90s and early 2000s from the logging industry. The GDP was raised immensely. And Solomon Islands was hailed as a success story for economic growth for a period there, yet the inequality and the corruption and the abuse of women and the human rights violations had never been greater. So I think we need to keep a perspective that economic growth, it is needed and it has its uses, but is not ultimately useful. And I think that that the Sustainable Development Goals could help to bring that balance. And also I think it could help us to do things differently, particularly around collaboration between different sectors.
So the key theme today obviously is coming out as around collaboration and how we extend ourselves and reach out and partner differently, but also that innovation is not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. I'd like you to put your hands together for our panel with Christian, Sabina, David, Sarah and James. And I'd like to invite Rasheen, Angus and Tane also to come up to a panel and just accept all the speakers this morning to accept a small token of our appreciation for your fantastic presentation and participation this morning. Please put your hands together. Oh. Okay, so Rasheena's got one already. So, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our morning sessions and plenary.